Okay. Dan, what is it? It's show
Show
9.
nine, show nine, baby.
Look, boxing returned to Las Vegas last night. First time since February 22nd when we were both there for Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury on that amazing night when Fury rescued the World Boxing Council title back to his own grasp after a brilliant performance knocking out Deontay Wilder in the 7th round. Top Rank made boxing in the bubble. It was an extraordinary event, 17 rounds in 5 fights. Maybe not the best set of fights you've ever seen, but it was great to see boxing back, wasn't it, under the Bob Arum banner?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, they worked a lot of hours and a lot of time and energy put into putting together, along with very close working relationship with the Nevada Commission to get the right rules and regulations to make sure it was safe for everybody and to put on the fights. And I know that they were mainly mismatched fights. I get that, and I don't love that, but those things happen. And, if you take a look at I'll give them a pass on the first one, okay? I mean, that's only fair in my mind. I mean, their main thing was safety and let's get this thing going again. And they're going to learn from the things that they did, if they made mistakes, if they didn't make mistakes. But the end result was there was live boxing. Shakur Stevenson, who is one of the featherweight title holders, went up to the junior lightweight division. He's one of the best young fighters in the sport. He scored a knockout with a beautiful couple of body shots against Felix Caraballo from Puerto Rico. And, did what he was supposed to do. And, you had some other excellent prospects on the undercard that were able to show themselves in front of an American TV audience for the first time. Again, not in huge events in terms of their opposition, but 2 good heavyweight prospects. Guido Vianello, the Italian Olympian, scored a nice knockout. Yeah, Jared Anderson, who was one of Tyson Fury's main sparring partners for the fight against Deontay Wilder in the rematch. He did a great job in that fight. You see my son walking in the background there. And they got the exposure that they were looking for. And, they have multiple shows per week. And hopefully, and if you take a look at the calendar, I think this will be the case. The fights will become more competitive over the next few weeks, in my mind.
Yeah, and also Guido Vianello, I've met in Tyson Fury's training camp before as well. In the Top Rank gym there off Dean Martin Drive, as we might as well name check it.
Right.
10 minutes from the MGM, a little spin over the bridge and you're there, over the freeway. Robesia Ramirez as well, the double Olympic champion, however, performing as well. Like you say, you and I have spoken about him before. Lost his first pro fight, and he's 3-0, 3-1 now, isn't he?
Yeah, 3-1. He's also the guy that defeated Shakur Stevenson for the gold medal in the Rio de Janeiro 2016 Olympics. So,
yes,
Shakur had said to me on my Impact Boxing show that I've been hosting when we had our interview last week that, if Robesia Ramirez can get himself back on track and get to a point where he's at an elite level as a professional, he'd love to get that rematch from the amateurs and score some revenge against him. He's going to have other business, in front of him for the time being. But, down the road a little bit, let Ramirez develop if he can. And, maybe we'll see that rematch down the line. I know that's something that Top Rank has in the back of their mind. And certainly something that Stevenson wants. And Ramirez, that would be a great goal for him to have in the future.
And those 2 body shots that won Shakur the fight in the 6th round against Felix Caraballo of Puerto Rico, you could hear them incredibly well. And with Bob Arum saying, I've never set... This is a guy, remember, Muhammad Ali, Marvin Hagler, Manny Pacquiao, Oscar De La Hoya, Floyd Mayweather, Tyson Fury. He's promoted all these guys. He's never sat as far away from the ring apron as he did last night.
But he could hear as well as he did because of the rules that are in place. There were no spectators allowed. So the amount of people that were physically there in the ringside area was quite limited. They had a total of about 150 people in that bubble, so to speak. But they were not all ringside because that included the other boxers and their teams who were kept away during the other fights. And that included other people that were in the back of the house and production type people. But in terms of people actually at ringside, I dare say there probably weren't 50 people there.
Yeah. Well, the boxers weren't allowed to come with their teams and watch the other fights either, were they?
No. They were brought in to their warm-up area a certain amount of time before the fight and then escorted, back to the area to change and shower and do whatever before they went back to their rooms. They did not stay, to my knowledge anyway, for the remainder of the fight. So you're talking about, they had 2 cut men that worked every single fight, and that was Stitch Duran and Mike Basil, who were 2 of the best cut men in the business. You had the folks that are associated with the commission, the executive director, Bob Bennett, and the referees and the judges that were there working the event. And they only had a few of each. They didn't have a new referee for every single fight. You know, Bob was there. You know, a few people from the top ranked staff, you know, who are running the logistics, of people like Brad Jacobs, who was integral in making this come off. Carl Moretti, who worked very hard on it also. You know, even you know, some of the, you know, Evan Korn, who does the public relations for Top Rank, was there to assist in getting him the fighters to do their interview with ESPN afterwards. Because remember, in terms of the ESPN broadcast group, normally you'd see people like Joe Tessitore calling the fights at ringside, Timothy Bradley Jr., Andre Ward, Mark Kriegel, they'd all be there. But in this case, you know, Joe was in the ESPN studios in Connecticut. Kriegel, Ward, and Bradley were in their homes in California. And the only on-air broadcaster from ESPN that was in the room, because he handled a lot of the post-fight interviews, or all the post-fight interviews, and would have been the one to do the blow-by-blow, I suppose, had there been some kind of a technical malfunction. And that was, you know, my good buddy Bernardo Osuna, who did a good job. And again, 6 feet apart, you know, in terms of doing the interviews. You know, so all that was there was, you know, maybe a couple of camera guys and gals and some of the floor directors, but a very, very small number of people that were actually inside. And I'll say this, whatever you think about the mismatches of the fights, and hopefully they'll get better, it looked good on TV. If you were sitting at home and just watching the fights, it looked nice. I mean, you can't deny that.
17 rounds, 5 fights. The one COVID test, of course, positive was Michaela Mayer against Helen Joseph. Once you test positive, you've got to leave. So they put her in an Uber back to the airport, and away she went. No,
you know what? She didn't go in the airport. She actually said on the interview during the broadcast, after she left the bubble along with the rest of her team, she drove 13 hours from Las Vegas back to Colorado Springs, where she had been training. I don't know if she drove herself or she was driven, but she went by automobile from Vegas to Colorado Springs.
Because she was COVID positive, yeah?
She was COVID positive, but thankfully she was asymptomatic, so she's not ill. She said, you know, I saw her on the interview that they did on the broadcast. She said she feels fine. What was interesting about it, that is something that also affected some other matches on the show, is that one of her trainers is, well, her head trainer is Al Mitchell, you know, the former U.S. Olympic coach, who was, you know, one of the best boxing guys you could ever know, and just a great man. He's her head trainer, but one of her assistant trainers is Kay Karoma, who's a very well-known trainer, worked with the amateurs also, but he was a guy that's been in the corners of Shakur as a trainer, and I think also of Jared Anderson. And so they had to mix up those corners because Kay had to leave also. He didn't test positive, but because he had been in proximity with Michaela and Al when they all arrived in Las Vegas, they didn't allow them to stay either. So it's not just the people that would test positive. It's the person that would test positive who has to leave the bubble, as well as those who are close to them. So Michaela never actually made it into the official bubble where she was mingling with other people. But, you know, she did what they're supposed to do. You get to Vegas, you go directly to take your test, and then you go self-quarantine in your room until the test results are back. She got the test result back, and it was positive, and she had to leave. So, you know, and unfortunately, this is now the second time, Gareth, that she had a fight that's had been canceled because of this, because this fight, and then she was supposed to fight. I can't remember if it was on Shakur's undercard in March.
It was.
Okay, because they also had the Michael Conlon card a couple of days later, but she was on one of those.
It was the Conlon card. It was the Conlon card.
Yeah.
Correct.
So they were both canceled when this whole thing blew up and everything shut down. So, you know, she said she's been through 2 training camps and has nothing to show for it, unfortunately. I'm sure she's in great shape, but she hasn't gotten a paycheck and she hasn't gotten a win.
She is in great shape, because I interviewed her by Zoom like this 3 days, or the day before. I interviewed her on the Friday before she went to Vegas. She looked in fantastic shape. Some interesting comments from them all. The heavyweights saying they were quite happy sitting in their room. They don't have to cut weight, remember? So, you know, in lockdown, it was a strange experience, locking down in the bubble to do this. Shakur saying it was quite a weird experience. It's nothing they've ever experienced before in terms of not having the crowd there. And our guys in our industry, they feed off crowds, don't they? That's the thing.
The one thing about the crowd element, and Shakur had said this to me and others in the lead up to the fight, because he was asked that. I think all the boxers will be asked about the notion of fighting without crowds, you know, as we go forward. Shakur's opinion was, of course, you know, like any of the fighters I have talked to, they all want to fight in front of a crowd. I mean, that's part of what they do this for, besides the glory and the money and all that, and the titles and everything. But he made the point, and other fighters have made the point also, that when they train for fights, you do it in a gym and there's no crowd. So they box round after round, spar, you know, a 10-rounder or a 12-rounder or whatever. And there's only a few people there also, no cheering. You know, you have your coach and maybe a few of the other guys in the gym. So fighting in front of no crowd in the arena is not an alien thing for these guys. Maybe in a real fight it is. And another thing, I saw.
But I think that's important. That's an important, because they've got to have that. It's about mindset with this, isn't it? You know.
No question. But I want to tell you this, and I was thinking about this also. But you know, Julian J. Rock Williams, who is the former junior middleweight, one of the former junior middleweight champions. I saw a tweet that he put out the other night, and he made the point, and he's exactly right. He says, you know, for those of us who are young fighters coming up on these undercards, so many times they were fighting basically in front of no audience because, as you know, having attended a million fights as I have, most of the time, at least in America anyway, unfortunately, you get to the arena for those first handful of undercard preliminary fights, and there's basically no crowd either. It starts to fill up, you know, as the card gets further to the closer to the main event. But you know, I've been in arenas where you could literally count the people in the stands for those first couple of fights. And some of these young prospects, that was not new to them because of Jared Anderson, who was only now 3-0, I believe, or maybe 4-0, whatever he is. But those first couple of fights, first 3 fights, he also was fighting essentially with no crowd because fighting so, you know, early on in undercard. So it's not really a big deal for them.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember watching Canelo's Las Vegas debut against Miguel Cotto's brother, and getting hit by right crosses for about a round and a half. Literally, with people saying to me, it might have even been you, or no, it was Don Jargin, the late great Don Jargin, saying, "Don't miss this ginger-haired kid from Mexico." And it was his Las Vegas debut. It was on the undercard of Mayweather and something, or Pacquiao.
I think it was Mayweather. Was it Mayweather and Ortiz, perhaps?
Might have been, yeah. And I went in there, and literally,
there were even before that.
Yeah, I mean, there were literally 4 rows of people in there. You know?
Yeah, nobody.
And
fighting with no crowd is not a big deal for at least for the preliminary guys present.
Yeah.
Not a big thing.
Hey, I think Canelo was 17 and a half at the time, or whatever he was.
A little older.
19, maybe.
He certainly developed nicely. Let's go.
I mean, yeah, but he got hit by so many right crosses. I couldn't believe what was going on. I'm thinking, why am I looking at this kid? And he slowly got into the fight, and he was tremendous. I think he stopped him in 10 rounds or something, or 9 rounds.
He did get wobbled bad in that first round, though, but ever since then, he's...
It was really weird. He's got a great chin on him. He's got one of the great chins, that kid.
No doubt.
So,
by the way, and then they get right back to it on Thursday, because they're going twice a week.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Jesse Magdaleno, talk to us. Just do a little preview for us of what we're going to see on Thursday night. Then.
Okay, so they basically what they're doing is weigh in, fight. So they're having the weigh in for that fight on Wednesday. They'll have the fights on Thursday. So Magdaleno, as people know, is a former title holder in the junior featherweight division. He's now fighting in the featherweight division, although this fight, to my knowledge, is scheduled to be contested at a contract of 128 pounds. He's fighting Yenifel Vicente, who is like a, you know, I don't want to call, I guess he's sort of journeyman-ish. You know, he's not that bad. He's got good punching power, and he's the kind of guy where if you're real, you're probably going to beat him, but he can definitely catch you with a good shot. So, you know, I sort of expect it to be at least better, more competitive, or at the very least more entertaining than the fight between Stevenson and Caraballo was, because that was such a mismatch. But look, Jesse Magdaleno, you know, wants to fight for another world title. These are the kinds of fights, not only does he have to win, frankly, but I think he's kind of got to have to look pretty good in those fights, because to get that shot, you want to give the audience something to make them say, hey, I can see this kid in another world title fight. So that's the main event. It's, you know, he's the clear favorite, but Vicente is a good puncher and has a lot of experience. He's fought some good opponents, and we'll see. I mean, it's a grade better overall competitively in my mind than the Shakur fight. Part of that's because Shakur's so talented.
As you've always done, you've made a list of the upcoming fights, as you used to do on ESPN. There are some really great names on there, but I just wonder whether it'd be interesting to see what the impact is on ESPN, whether people tire of them. But Bob's also said that this is phase 1. Phase 2 is going to be with more of an audience, hopefully in August, and then in September and October, if circumstances allow, we'll go to bigger stadiums then. So, and he is saying quite openly, quite lucidly about it, listen, it's all a work in progress. He said to me the other day, if 4 people test positive for one of the cards, we'll have to scrap that card, and then we'll scrap it, and we'll just move. We're going to take every card as a discrete unit as it comes. And get
That's the only thing you can do, because he doesn't know, his staff doesn't know, the commission doesn't know. You know, you just go one step at a time, and it's not just going to be that way for Top Ranks events. When Eddie Hearn and Matchroom come back and do their events, hopefully sometime in July or August, or when PBC returns, presumably in late July or August, they're all going to be in the same boat. They're all going to have to follow the same situations. Frank Warren, any promoter, Golden Boy is involved right now trying to work out their stuff for their return. It's not just Top Rank. They're all going to have to follow these rules. They're all going to face the possibility of positive tests. And by the way, you mentioned the schedule that I keep. Yes, of course, for many years I kept it on ESPN.com, but if people want to find the schedule, I'm still keeping it now just because I enjoy doing it. They can find it on my verified Facebook page. It's Dan Rayfield Boxing. And it's right there pinned to the top of my page. And I'll update it every single day.
The other news today, the big news which broke just a couple of hours before we met and here in this chat, chat number 9, is the pandemic lockdown chat number 9. That is, we've had many more than 9 chats.
Just not recorded for the public to view.
Exactly. Tyson Fury came out this afternoon on his Instagram and said, I'm going to beat up Deontay Wilder, but I've signed a 2-fight deal with Anthony Joshua. It's 50-50. It's a 2-fight.
I don't think he said he signed it. I think he said he agreed to it.
So he's agreed to it. So not signed. He's agreed to it.
Big difference.
There is
in our line of work.
Correct. Eddie Hearn's been on Sky Sports here in the UK saying the same thing. The fight's done. But the big or 2 giant elephants in the room.
There's about 12 giant elephants in the room.
Was that?
There's about 12 giant elephants in the room.
Okay. But there's Kubrat Pulev and there's Deontay Wilder first. They're not stepping aside for those 2 guys to fight. So you're talking about the final before you've had the semi-finals. You're talking about the final before you've had the playoffs.
It's absolutely maddening. Okay, and look, don't get me wrong. Like every single boxing fan on the planet and every writer on the planet and probably even other people within the business of boxing, you want to see the best against the best for the undisputed title. Obviously, at this moment in time, that would mean Tyson Fury against Anthony Joshua. It's a great matchup. It's an exciting fight. I hope it happens. I want to see it. But whatever the announcement in quote marks was today, I don't even understand why it was an announcement because everybody has always known all along, if they're actually going to make a deal, it's going to be a 50-50 deal. It's going to be a multi-fight deal because on these level fights, you never just do a 1-fight deal. Now, maybe the second fight doesn't happen, but you can name any big heavyweight fight that you could think of that wasn't a mandatory where there was a 2-fight deal. Lewis Tyson had a 2-fight deal. Now, they never did the second fight, but that was their own election. That was their decision. You know, Klitschko and Joshua had a 2-fight deal. Klitschko always had rematch clauses in his fights, and he would even
Yuri and Klitschko had a 2-fight deal.
Yuri and Klitschko, even when Klitschko had a mandatory fight, oftentimes those deals, most of the time those deals, they had rematch language in there, and the boxer that was the challenger would get extra money in the deal, in contemplation of that possibility. So the fact that you would have Joshua and Fury make some kind of agreement that included a second fight, that's like giving water to a fish. I mean, it's just obvious. So I just think this was agenda driven. I'm not sure what it was, but and I hope it happens, but there's so many things that have to go on between now and then. So you're telling me you're going to say we have a deal for 2 fights, not until 2021. You still have no idea if you can have big crowds at events. And obviously that's a stadium level fight. Combined with the fact that you have Joshua with a signed contract for the mandatory against Pulev. That's not going away. Neither one of them, nobody on his camp has shown any desire for a step aside deal. You have Fury that owes a contractual rematch, 3rd fight rather, to Deontay Wilder, who claims that he's not stepping aside. So those are there. Then you have the people that co-promote Alexander Usyk with Eddie Hearn from K2.
Yes.
How they have no intention of passing up their mandatory situation, and that's the one that's due after in the WBO. And on top of that, you have in the WBC side, you have Dillian White, who was probably the most aggrieved party of all of them, because he's been sitting mandatory for it seems like forever and hasn't gotten his opportunity. And
now, but hang on the Dillian White thing, they're now talking about moving Tyson to emeritus champion and Dillian White to fight.
Not emeritus champion. They're talking about franchise champion.
Franchise, not emeritus. Franchise champion.
And I'll make the point that I've made before when you and I have discussed this, and you and I have talked about this with Mauricio Suleiman from the WBC in some dinners we've had with him in Las Vegas. I don't care what belts are up. I want to see the 2 best guys fight, but you also like to see them all unify the titles. If they make that move and they give Tyson Fury the franchise designation and they give White the WBC champion designation, which he would get because he's currently the interim. You can follow all this nonsense. I'm just stating facts. That means that the fight between between Fury and Joshua, while the two best heavyweights for many of the belts for the lineal title fight we all want to see, all good, it technically would not be for the undisputed title because the guy would not be the WBC champion. The WBC champion would be Dillian Whyte. So
yeah, but Dan, they do a sleight of hand and suddenly Fury would be.
It's bullshit, though. That's absolute complete bullshit. I mean, bottom line is they got a lot of things to figure out with mandatories on both sides, where they're going to have the fight, can they have fans, who's going to put up the massive amount of money, what the broadcast situation is, in terms, obviously, they're on separate broadcasters in the UK, they're on separate broadcasters in America. I mean, I'm not saying these are not things that can't be figured out, but to somehow claim that just because they agreed to do the things everybody knew they were going to do anyway, which is 50-50 on the first fight and 60-40 on the second fight, and it's a 2-fight deal, that's fine.
The only way that they could go ahead and have those 2 fights right now is if both of them just relinquish the belts. That's the only way they could do it.
That will never happen because...
No, I know that, but that is the only way that they could go ahead and have that fight next.
In a perfect world, they would do that, and I would certainly have no problem with that as a fan. I mean,
exactly.
The guy that would emerge would be considered the champion. But
they almost don't need the belts to do it, But I want to see Fury have that 3rd fight with Wilder first. I do want to see that fight, and I want to see. I'm not so interested in Joshua against Pulev. I think he'll do a number on Pulev and stop him in 7 rounds.
But I mean, I have no problem with seeing Joshua against Usyk. That's a fascinating fight.
Well, I want to ask a question here. We've had a question coming on Usyk. Yeah. Usyk is widely. This is El Urki, El Lurki. Usyk is widely regarded as the next in line once this little trilogy is wrapped up. Yes and no.
Listen, here, the bottom line with Usyk, it's very simple. He's the WBO mandatory. Yeah. The WBO mandatory was ruled to come after the mandatory that he has against Kubrat Pulev. So Kubrat Pulev is the IBF mandatory. That's the next fight. It's a signed deal already. They were supposed to fight in July. And the next fight, mandatory-wise, in the rotation system that the organizations have agreed to, the WBO is next up, period.
Yeah, but if they have a world unification for an undisputed champion, he would fight. I think he would fight Fury first.
He might, but they have to deal with Usyk either.
Yeah, they have to deal with him, but it would trump it, wouldn't it? Essentially.
No, it wouldn't. It would only if they make a deal.
If they make a deal, yeah, but they're going to be able to make a deal. Usyk's not going to mind, is he?
I don't know about that. The comments from his handlers were like, no, we're next after the fight. Now, that could be posturing because they're looking for a big payday, and that's certainly possible. All I'm saying is you cannot stipulate from the Joshua camp or the Fury camp that there's a deal when there's so many things that need to be addressed.
Correct. No, I get that.
That's all I'm saying.
These are all the elephants in the room.
I'm not saying those things can't be addressed, and they can't deal with Usyk, or that something can go on with that. But you have to deal with them one by one.
Well, when Usyk's promoter, who is Eddie Hearn as well, who's got a deal with, is saying on Sky Sports that Fury and Joshua is agreed.
But Eddie cares more about the business of Joshua than he cares about Usyk. Eddie Hearn is personal friends with Joshua. He's promoted him since the first day of his professional career. His relationship with Usyk is not like that. It's strictly business. He's the co-promoter. He's only been involved in him for a couple of fights. The real people that are involved in him are from K2 and his manager, Ed Guinness. So, I mean, and I'm not knocking Eddie for this, but he has an allegiance to Joshua for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which is their personal relationship and the fact that he brings way more money into Matchroom than Usyk ever would.
Look, but the question...
I'm just keeping it real.
No, I know that.
You got me all riled up, dude.
What's that?
You got me all riled up.
No, but I'm trying to navigate the route I think they will make, not necessarily what they are obligated to make. Let me just ask this: are Usyk's skills? This is what Alurk is asking. Are Usyk's skills good enough to make up for his lack of size against the likes of Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury?
Absolutely, they are. No question. Now, I'm not sitting here picking him, saying he wins those fights, but number one, Usyk is not a small man. I mean, I've been in his presence several times. He's a big, sturdy, strong dude, and solid as a rock as a cruiserweight, and now seemingly solid as a rock as a smaller heavyweight. He definitely has the skills. He's got phenomenal footwork. He's got tremendous defense. The guy's one of the great amateurs of recent times. Olympic gold medal winner, has fought all the top guys as a cruiserweight. beat them pretty much all without too much problem. There's no doubt in my mind that he can compete with anybody in the heavyweight division. Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, Dillian White, Luis Ortiz. You pick a heavyweight, he can compete with them. No doubt in my mind. Is he going to beat them all? That's to be seen. But, he's definitely live in any of those matches.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing him fight Derek Chisora. I think that'll be interesting. I think he's got the skills to pay the bills in that one. I think it'll be very interesting. Chisora's having an amazing second life as a heavyweight, and he's looked very good recently, particularly Dillian White and the knockout of Artur Szpilka. I do think he may struggle against the likes of Tyson Fury. I've already gone on record as saying a Usyk who brings his power up to the heavyweight division and on his night could be a real problem for Anthony Joshua. A real problem for him, He's got
great hand speed. I'm not going to say he's a knockout artist as a heavyweight. He did get a stoppage in his first heavyweight fight, which was coming off of an injury and a long layoff against Chaz Witherspoon, who's, not going to be mistaken for Tim Witherspoon.
Yeah.
One of his, his cousin. But, for a first step in the heavyweight division on short notice because the original opponent dropped out because of a failed drug test, I thought he looked okay. It took him a couple of rounds to get into the groove, and then after that, he seemed fine. He was coming off of a bad elbow injury that kept him out of the ring for quite a while. But I think Usyk is a guy that can possibly upset the apple cart. As a heavyweight moving up, he might be more formidable, let's say, than a Michael Spinks when he went from light heavyweight to heavyweight. There are others that have moved up, but Usyk is not to be taken lightly in my mind. I give him a better chance against Joshua, frankly, than I would give Pulev. I mean, Pulev's not a bad contender.
I completely agree. Completely.
He's a basic 1-2 right hand, stands in front of you. Usyk is going to be the guy that brings some more wrinkles to the game.
James Becker's asking why have they taken the path of making it a 2-fight deal. You answered that just now. It's just something that has always happened when you've got such big fights. Rob Farmer asked this one. It's the last thing we're going to answer tonight. Will both fights be in the UK, or at least one of them? Let me answer that first. This is the biggest, richest fight in British boxing history. I'm talking about Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua.
Probably not even close, right?
It's huge. It's enormous. Now, if you tell me it ought to happen in America, you're going to get me riled up because I don't want this to happen in Dubai. I don't want this to happen in Australia. Sorry.
Well, that's where they're talking about having Fury.
Give me a break, will you? Last week, Bob said it was in Macau. The week before, he said it was in Saudi.
Let's just put it like this. They're probably talking to those places.
No, people are just making offers. Steve Monaghan made an offer. So what? He made an offer. It doesn't make sense to have 60,000 Aussies in a stadium watching it and us watching it at 12 noon. Doesn't make sense. It's a great idea. It's a great throw around story, Let's toss another story out there. Let's create a bit more publicity. This is the ideal place to have it. And if they build it properly, every channel, every news channel, every newspaper is going to cover this. And we may get, if they build it properly, towards 2.5-3 million pay-per-view buys. They can put the tickets up for the stadium. It's enormous. They can.
But here's the question, Gareth. Are we going to reach a point in this pandemic, eventually I think we'll, but in the near enough future when this fight within the time frame that they've talked about this fight taking place, which I guess from what Eddie was saying would be 2021. I'll believe it when I see it, but okay, let's say 2021. Are we going to be at a point where you can freely have that caliber of an event with a stadium crowd of like 100,000 people?
Yeah, I think a year from now you can. I think you can.
I hope so.
I've got a feeling unless there's another huge spike, you can feel it around you in society. Things are relaxing more.
But that's because people are just tired of being inside.
No, but also there'll be a vaccine at some point, Dan, and the majority of people will take it.
Even when they have the vaccine, they're still going to have to be able to distribute it. In the United States, the number of cases is spiking in like 19 different states. So while it's lower in places like New York than it was, and maybe a few other places, it's rising dramatically in places like Arizona, California, Texas, Now, some of that's because there's more testing, but some of it because if you read the statistics, is because there's more hospitalizations. So just the bottom line is, and I'm not an expert, I just know what I've been reading in the papers and reading on the internet. But the bottom line is, nobody knows. Everybody has to be prepared for the possibility that there might not be the ability to have a 100,000 seat stadium fight, in which case you need somebody to pay the bread to offset what they lose in that gate. And that would probably mean
Saudi Arabia,
exotic location, like a Macau, Middle East, Dubai, wherever.
But let's hope and pray that it's in the right location. I don't mind. And also, if that fight, if let's say, I actually think that Wilder and Fury will fight in February in Las Vegas. I think that's what will happen. That's my instinct on it.
Interesting. I've never really thought about that. I mean,
that's my instinct.
Have that by the end of this year. We'll see.
Yeah,
but think it can happen at the end of this year.
Well, yeah, it might do. But by the time they're comfortable about having 20,000 people in an arena, they might go. It's October, November. Let them go into camp. Why don't we try it at the Raiders Stadium with 60,000 if we can get it big enough to be that? Maybe it's not as big as that for a crowd at the moment. But
well, the good thing about that is if you do an event at the Raiders Stadium, and this is taking it to the point of like Arum speaking about doing, say, like a Lomachenko Lomachenko and Teofimo Lopez, about possibly doing it at the Raiders Allegiant Stadium in Vegas, which is brand new, where the Raiders are going to play theoretically when the NFL season starts. Is that, I'm not talking about the heavyweight, but even Deontay Wilder and Fury in America is not going to draw 60,000.
No, I agree.
Put in a stadium like that, that's large enough, where you would have enough space to socially distance and still have 15,000 people.
Yeah.
And so that could work if you have
a weird atmosphere though, with people three seats.
It would be, because it would seem kind of empty, but there would still be a lot of people. And at the end of the day, the idea is you want to be able to have a gate, you want to have a safe atmosphere, and you want to have a good fight. And so that could work. And even Wilder and Fury in a third fight is not going to sell out that stadium. They would draw a good crowd, obviously, but there would be plenty of room to socially distance, and not just in the Raiders Stadium, frankly. Any NFL caliber stadium or Major League Baseball stadium, has enough seats where you could distance the crowd and still, put.
I think a year from now, Dan, I don't think we'll be socially distancing like we are at the moment. I really don't.
Well, I hope you're right.
Well, maybe people will wear masks and gloves and not socially distance.
Masks, probably, yes.
How are they going to drink with masks and gloves on? But never mind. That's
they make a little. No, they make a little hole for the straw for the beer. The Brits are inventive. They'll figure that out.
Look, I'm going to ask another good question from Gary Dayton. I was wanting to know, when a boxer is champion, how much do they pay in sanctioning fees? This is an interesting one for you, and it's a very good question, actually.
Generally speaking, if you're a champion of one of the organizations, you pay about 3% of your purse or your disclosed purse. Obviously, if you're making the tens of millions of dollars, like some of the guys, you're not paying 3% of that. The organizations, to my knowledge, they do cap it at a maximum of like, say, $250,000 or $300,000 or something like that.
I thought it was 200, but
yeah. Maybe it's 200. But the point is, it's in the lower six figures. That if you're a champion of that level, and I'm talking about like back to the days like when Tyson was champion or when Oscar De La Hoya was in title fights, or now presently you're talking about Joshua or Fury or Canelo, the biggest names out there, it's generally about 3% of the purse. Now, when you're dealing with an event where it's multiple sanctioning bodies, they're not paying 3%, 3%. Usually the organizations have to agree to take a cut. So sometimes it's maybe 1.5% if it's unification. That's one of the reasons why the organizations really don't like, it's a dirty little secret. The organizations actively sometimes work against unifications. Why? Because yes, the purses are greater in some instances because of the magnitude of the fight, but not always. And if that's the case, it reduces what they would get on a sanction fee. So what I know from a lot of people in boxing who serve as attorneys for boxers and promoters and such is oftentimes they will go to the organizations and they will try to negotiate a fee. So you take take a De La Hoya, for example, because I remember this coming up in some of his big fights that I covered. Oscar had a multitude of different titles over the years in the various organizations, and he was making the most money at that time. And the sanctioning bodies wanted their piece of that pie. And because Oscar was such a big star and the sanctioning bodies wanted to be involved with those events, Oscar's people would go to the organization and say, look, we're not paying this much money. We'll pay this much money. And they would go back and forth and they would ultimately come to a deal, sometimes not totally disclose what the numbers were, but he would pay a reduced amount, but still a hefty amount relative to
Yeah.
what the organization would get from a regular title fight. So 3% is like the rule of thumb, but for the biggest names, it can be quite a bit less in terms of the overall money.
Well, clearly, night is falling here behind me, and it's getting darker and darker. You're still in the light. Well, I've got one more question, which is actually very good. My TV Digital IPTV. The only way Joshua wins, okay, let's say Fury and Joshua are fighting, just to finalize, just to bring a cap over it all today.
Okay.
The only way Joshua wins is by a very lucky punch, in my personal opinion. He hasn't faced anyone of Fury's level yet. I would suspect Fury will win everything, including the mind games. Let me just answer that first of all before you answer and we close for tonight's show. I don't think Joshua needs a lucky punch to win the fight. I think it's a fascinating matchup. I do think Fury will win the mind games. I think he's very clever because I think Joshua likes things in his control. He doesn't like the unexpected. And I think Fury will toy with him and try and get into his head in that way. And I think it will be a very, very interesting build-up. But as for the fight itself, don't forget, Joshua is still learning in the ropes, but he's a devastating finisher. And if he manages to get close enough and hurts Fury, and I do think Fury wins, he will finish him. It's as simple as that.
I can't disagree with pretty much anything you said. I'll just take one small tweak to what you said about the mind games. I think that may have been the case a couple years ago, but I think Joshua has learned more how to control the emotions and deal with that after what he went through with the 2 fights with Andy Ruiz. You know, I don't think all the mind games and the knockout loss, at least not externally, perhaps inside Joshua and in his mind that was the case, but at least what he showed the public, you know, he was not impacted by that knockout loss in the sense of his mentality or the things that Joshua was saying leading up to the fight, Andy Ruiz was saying leading up to the fight. I thought he was calm and cool and, you know, had a great mental preparation for that fight. So one thing he'll know going into a fight against Tyson Fury, if it happens, is he doesn't have the memory of being knocked out by Tyson Fury. He'll have confidence, I think, compared to the rematch with Ruiz, who, you know, took him out, you know, 4 knockdowns and ended it pretty impressively. In terms of the actual fight, you know, it's hard to disagree. Tyson Fury is probably a more diversified opponent. He can do so many different things. Anthony is a tremendous fighter and has a lot of great attributes, but I don't know if he's as well-rounded in all of the things in boxing, whether it's the speed or the foot movement or the technical ability compared to Tyson Fury. But that's why we want to see the fight. I think most people at this moment in time probably would lean towards Fury, especially after seeing the way that he took apart Wilder, you know, in the February fight.
Yeah, you can see a mid to late knockout, can't you? If he takes him on.
But you made the point. Look, Anthony Joshua is a ruthless finisher.
Ruthless.
If he hurts you, man, you're done. You know, I mean, I know Wilder had that rep also when he put Fury down twice in their first fight, and Tyson, to his credit, was able to survive. You know, if Joshua puts him down twice, I'm not so sure that Tyson Fury gets up. But it's the biggest heavyweight fight of our time, and I know everybody hopes it happens. Dan, it's always a pleasure. It's late here. I haven't had dinner. I don't want to know what you're having for dinner, but I'm going to go. I don't know. I'll email you later. I'll tell you what we had. I'll catch up with you in a couple of days. Always a pleasure. All right, Gareth. You be good, my man. Good to talk to you. My friend.